I'd walk a mile for a camel.
20 incredible things from the 70s that are banned today. Welcome back for a nostalgic look at the 1970s, an era defined by a sense of liberty and boldness. A time when many common activities are now either forbidden or outright dangerous. Do you recall a time when you could bike without a helmet, or when it was normal for children to buy cigarettes for their parents? From seemingly innocent pastimes to dramatically different social norms, how did the world change so much? Join us as we explore 20 things that were a regular part of daily life in the 70s, but could now get you in serious legal trouble or put your life at risk. Prepare to feel both nostalgic and amazed by the things that have vanished over time. Playing on train tracks. Let's begin with a memory from childhood that many of us share. Playing on train tracks. In the 70s, train tracks weren't just a path to school or home. They were an exhilarating playground. Kids would often walk on the rails trying to stay balanced on the shining metal, or simply take a shortcut across the station platform. Some even put coins on the tracks to see them get squashed by a fast-moving train, a classic but harmless prank. Back then, the attitude toward railway safety was incredibly casual. Hardly anyone thought about the potential dangers. But things are different now. Today, railroad companies in the US have put in place strict trespassing laws for track areas. Constant safety campaigns warn about the serious risks, as modern trains are faster and quieter and they need a much longer distance to stop than before. Stepping onto train property without permission is not only a life-threatening action, but also comes with significant fines and legal consequences. What was once a childhood game is now an illegal and highly dangerous activity. Clackers toys. Speaking of dangerous childhood games, do you remember Clackers? This toy was incredibly popular in the 70s, exciting but surprisingly risky. It was made of two heavy, glossy acrylic balls connected by a string. The goal was to swing them up and down quickly so they would hit each other with a satisfying clack. The faster you swung, the louder the sound, and the greater the chance you'd get hit in the hand, or even worse, in the face. Clackers were a lot of fun, but they also came with risks. If you lost control, the balls could hit you in the face, causing bruises or even shattering into sharp pieces, which could lead to serious injuries. Due to the rise in injury reports, clackers were completely banned in many schools and public places. In some cases, as other sources have pointed out, they were banned because of the injuries they caused. Eventually, manufacturers had to redesign clackers with softer, safer materials to prevent accidents. What was once a test of patience, rhythm, and coordination is now a perfect example of how toy safety has become a major priority. Lawn darts. Continuing with 70s toys that are no longer around. Do you remember lawn darts? This was a common backyard game in the 70s, particularly during summer barbecues. The rules were simple. You'd toss large metal darts with sharp tips toward a circular target on the lawn. The feeling of making an accurate throw and hearing that thud as the dart hit the ground was exhilarating. However, the frightening truth was that these darts were not only heavy, but also sharp enough to pierce the ground and sometimes people. Just one bad throw or a child accidentally walking into the playing area could lead to a serious injury or even death. Tragic accidents prompted parents and authorities to speak out. Eventually, by the late 1980s, the US government completely banned the sale and use of sharp-tipped lawn darts. Today, if you find a set of lawn darts, they have rounded tips made of a safer, weighted material for throwing, but they no longer pose the threat of the original version. Easy Bake Oven. Moving from outdoor toys to an indoor childhood classic, the Easy Bake Oven. In the 70s, there was no feeling quite like being able to bake your own little cakes and cookies with this magical oven. It was every kid's dream come true. And the best part? It used just a regular light bulb to cook your treats. As another source also points out, the Easy Bake Oven used just a regular light bulb to cook treats, and the thrill was in the process of making it yourself. You'd rip open the cake mix packets, mix them up, and put the tiny pan inside the oven. Then you'd sit back and wait, watching the light bulb do its magic. While the results weren't always the tastiest, sometimes they were a bit strange, but that didn't matter. The real joy was in the process and the satisfaction of saying, "I made this." However, that very light bulb posed a significant risk. It got extremely hot, often reaching temperatures over 175 degrees Celsius, 350 degrees Fahrenheit, putting children at risk of severe burns if they accidentally touched the inside of the oven. Injury reports increased, with some children suffering second-degree burns. By the early 2000s, modern easy-bake ovens replaced the light bulb with safer enclosed heating elements. This toy still brings back fond memories, but looking back, it's wild how it once posed a serious burn risk. Children could buy cigarettes. Now, let's discuss something that today's generation might find unbelievable. In the 70s, children could easily buy cigarettes. Smoking was incredibly common back then, to the point where it was normal for a child to walk into a grocery store and buy a pack of cigarettes for their parents. Sometimes they'd have a small piece of paper with a handwritten note from their parents, and sometimes they didn't even need any proof of age. Vending machines were also everywhere, from restaurants to public areas, allowing anyone with a few coins to buy cigarettes. Today, the situation has changed dramatically. Strict age regulations, thorough ID checks, and public smoking bans are widely enforced. A child trying to buy cigarettes now is illegal and will result in serious penalties. Cigarette vending machines have become a thing of the past, only appearing in nostalgic films. This change shows how much public health awareness has improved. High school smoking areas. Staying on the topic of cigarettes, another thing that was normal in the 70s, but has now completely disappeared, is high school smoking areas. Yes, you heard that correctly. Many high schools back then had special designated areas where students could smoke openly between classes. Teens could legally smoke their cigarettes without any opposition. Even many teachers smoked on school grounds, which created a rather smoky atmosphere. However, as public health awareness and the dangers of secondhand smoke grew, attitudes began to change. By the late 1980s, schools started getting rid of these smoking areas. And by the 1990s, the idea of students and teachers openly smoking on school grounds became truly shocking and almost non-existent. This is a clear testament to how society has changed and prioritized the health of the younger generation. Of all the things from the 70s we've looked at so far, which one surprised you the most to learn was once normal? Let us know in the comments. Cigarette ads on TV. And speaking of how common cigarettes were in the 70s, we can't forget cigarette ads on TV. Images of rugged cowboys on horses, stylish celebrities, or elegant men calmly smoking filled television channels. These ads were designed to make smoking seem attractive, stylish, and even a symbol of success. Cigarettes were promoted as a crucial part of life, from relaxing moments to social events. However, health concerns grew. As scientific studies began to clearly show the link between smoking and serious diseases, pressure from the public and health organizations led to a major crackdown. In 1971, the US government issued a complete ban on cigarette advertising on TV and radio. Although the tobacco industry later adapted by shifting advertising to magazines, sponsoring sporting events, and appearing in Hollywood films, this change marked a major milestone in the fight against tobacco, completely changing the media landscape and how we get health information. Smoking on airplanes. If you ever flew in the 70s, you'll instantly remember the sight of airplane cabins often thick with cigarette smoke. Back then, smoking on planes was completely normal. And even though airlines had smoking and non-smoking sections, smoke still went everywhere, filling the entire cabin. Ashtrays were built right into every armrest, ready for passengers to use. You could easily see the person next to you enjoying a cigarette without much thought for those around them. However, as the dangers of secondhand smoke became clearer, pressure from the public and health organizations increased significantly. People started to realize that inhaling others' smoke also caused serious health harm. In response to these concerns, smoking was banned on short domestic flights in the US in 1988. And by 2000, this rule was made even stricter. Smoking was completely banned on all flights in the US, whether they were short or long, domestic or international. This was a major change that led to cleaner air and protected the health of millions of passengers. Loose seatbelt laws. Moving to road safety. Something we take for granted today wasn't a given in the 70s. Extremely loose seatbelt laws. Back then, using a seatbelt was primarily a personal choice rather than a required safety measure. Many drivers thought seatbelts were restrictive or even dangerous in certain accidents. Even more notably, many cars from that era didn't even have seatbelts in the back seats, and children were often allowed to move freely in the car with no child seats or restraints at all. The image of a child standing on the front seat or sitting on an adult's lap while the car was moving was common. However, with the rise in traffic accidents and research on the importance of seatbelts, things began to change. New York became the first state to pass a mandatory seatbelt law in 1984. After that, studies by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, NHTSA, confirmed that seatbelts reduce the risk of death by 45% for front seat passengers and 60% for backseat passengers. By the 1990s, seatbelt laws became standard across the US. This was a crucial change that saved millions of lives and reshaped our driving habits. Minimal child car seat regulations. Following up on traffic safety, in the 70s, child car seat laws were almost non-existent. Most parents back then simply relied on standard vehicle seatbelts, or even worse, held children on their laps while traveling by car. Although child car seats existed, they were mainly designed for convenience rather than safety. No strict crash test standards were applied to these seats, meaning they didn't truly protect children in an accident. However, a groundbreaking 1985 study by NHTSA completely changed this perception. The study revealed a heartbreaking truth. Car accidents were the leading cause of death for children aged 1 to 4. This statistic was shocking and prompted a strong wave of changes in attitudes and laws. As a result, today, every state across the US has passed mandatory child safety seat laws. These seats must meet strict safety standards and undergo thorough crash testing, ensuring maximum safety for our youngest passengers. Drunk driving with high BAC limits. Another serious issue related to traffic safety in the 70s was the surprisingly common practice of drinking and driving. The legal blood alcohol content, BAC, limits back then were also much more relaxed than today. In many states, you could legally drive with a BAC of 0.10% or higher, a level considered extremely dangerous today. Having a few drinks and then driving home was not unusual, and awareness of the risks of this behavior was very limited. However, the consequences of drunk driving became unacceptable, especially with the increase in fatal accidents. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, a powerful organization was formed, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, MADD. MAD and other advocacy groups fought tirelessly to pass stricter DUI driving under the influence laws. As a result, by the mid-1980s, most states had lowered the legal BAC limit to 0.08%. This fight completely changed how we view driving after drinking, transforming it from an acceptable behavior into a serious crime, minimal airport security. Now, imagine a world where air travel was extremely comfortable and simple. That's exactly what airport security was like in the 70s. No long security lines, no X-ray scanners, and you didn't have to take off your shoes or worry about liquid restrictions. Passengers could go straight to the gate, meeting family and friends right in the boarding area. Cockpit doors weren't locked mid-flight. Sometimes, pilots even left them open. The feeling of flying back then was truly free and without restrictions. However, this lack of security came at a steep price, with a sharp increase in hijackings, over 200 recorded in 1972 alone. But it was the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001 that changed everything forever. After that tragedy, the Aviation and Transportation Security Act was passed, leading to the establishment of the TSA, Transportation Security Administration. The TSA implemented unprecedented strict security measures, from thorough baggage checks to full body scans, making the air travel experience completely different from before. What from the 70s do you think should never have been banned? Or is there anything you wish could go back to being normal? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Drinking age of 18. Going back to major legal and social changes in the 70s, here's an interesting fact many today might not know. The legal drinking age in many states was 18. This came after the 26th Amendment was ratified in 1971, lowering the voting age from 21 to 18. The logic at the time was that if you were old enough to vote, serve in the military, and fight for your country, you should also be allowed to buy and drink alcohol. So, seeing 18-year-olds freely buying beer and liquor was not unusual. However, this change led to severe unforeseen consequences. Drunk driving accidents skyrocketed. Studies showed alcohol played a role in over 60% of traffic fatalities. Given the situation, in 1984, the U.S. Congress passed the National Minimum Drinking Age Act, forcing states to raise the drinking age to 21 by threatening to cut federal highway funding. By 1988, all 50 states had adopted the higher drinking age, a decision that, while controversial at first, proved effective in reducing accidents and protecting community safety. Child labor. Another aspect of the 70s that we find hard to accept today is the presence of child labor. Although the Fair Labor Standards Act, FLSA, had been in place since 1938, child labor laws were still relatively relaxed. It wasn't unusual for children to work, especially in agriculture, family businesses, or low-income households. Many parents back then believed that having a job from a young age helped build character, responsibility, and discipline in their children. Children often did manual labor, helped out in shops, or worked in fields. However, with societal development, concerns about the dangers of child labor arose, particularly children's exposure to hazardous machinery or toxic chemicals. In 1976, the Child Labor Amendment was introduced, and it wasn't until 1989 that the United Nations adopted the Convention on the Rights of the Child, laying the foundation for protecting children's rights globally. Currently, the U.S. has tightened regulations under the FLSA, prohibiting children from working in hazardous conditions and limiting their working hours. This has helped protect millions of children from potential job-related risks. Owning exotic pets without permits. You might be surprised to learn that in the 70s, owning unusual exotic pets without permits was very common and largely unregulated. People could easily buy a unique iguana, a colorful macaw, or even a large boa constrictor from pet stores with little oversight. Origin documentation or care regulations were almost non-existent, and most importantly, no special permit was needed to own these animals. However, as the exotic pet trade grew, concerns about public safety, animal welfare, and ecological impact also increased. There were instances of escaped or abandoned pets, sometimes becoming invasive species that negatively affected native ecosystems. To address this, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service introduced regulations in 1980. And by the late 1990s and early 2000s, most states had passed laws requiring permits to own exotic pets, ensuring that their ownership is more strictly controlled and safer for both animals and communities. Red dye, number 2. Shifting to food and health in the 70s. A food additive caused major concern. Red dye, number 2. This synthetic dye was widely used to create a vibrant red color in many foods and drinks. However, studies began to suggest a link between this dye and potential health risks. Although conclusions weren't clear, public anxiety grew. Interestingly, even M&Ms, despite never using red dye number 2, they used red number 40, decided to stop producing red M&Ms in 1976 to avoid causing customer concern. Ultimately, to ensure consumer safety, the U.S. officially banned red dye number 2 in 1976. Red M&Ms later returned in 1987 when red number 40 was deemed safe. This is a classic example of how public perception, though sometimes not entirely based on absolute scientific truth, can significantly shape business decisions and government regulations. Cyclamate sweetener, another food additive that was very common in the 60s and 70s but later banned, is cyclamates. This artificial sweetener was 30 times sweeter than sugar and calorie-free, making it an ideal ingredient in diet sodas and sugar-free products. With the boom in diet trends, cyclamates quickly became a regular part of the American diet. However, in 1969, major concerns arose. A study indicated that extremely high doses of cyclamates could cause bladder tumors in test mice. Although this dosage was much higher than human consumption levels, the fear of a link to cancer prompted the U.S. government to act immediately. The U.S. banned this sweetener in 1969, and it was officially removed from the market in 1970. Interestingly, while the U.S. banned it, many other countries like Canada and European nations still allow the use of cyclamates, showing differences in global food safety regulations. Leaded gasoline. Now, let's talk about a major environmental change we often overlook, but which had far-reaching effects: leaded gasoline. In the 70s, almost every gas station across the U.S. sold leaded gasoline, a fuel additive that had been used for decades to boost engine performance and make cars run smoother. The distinct smell of vehicle exhaust back then was also linked to the presence of lead in the air. However, a serious health problem emerged. When cars burned leaded fuel, they released toxic lead particles into the air. Scientific studies began linking lead exposure to severe health issues in humans, especially children, causing developmental delays and brain damage. Given this clear evidence, by the mid-1970s, the U.S. government acted, gradually phasing leaded gasoline out of the market. By the 1990s, leaded gasoline had almost completely disappeared, marking a significant victory for public health and the environment. Lead paint. And if you thought lead was only in gasoline, remember lead-based paint. In the 70s, lead-based paint was incredibly common. It was used to paint homes, schools, playground equipment, toys, and even baby cribs. It was favored for its high durability, good color retention, and beautiful gloss. The image of brightly colored, durable homes was often because of this type of paint. However, just like leaded gasoline, research on lead poisoning from paint increased, showing that children exposed to lead dust or peeling paint could suffer serious health problems such as developmental delays, organ damage, and various other illnesses. This was a hidden threat within our own homes. Therefore, in 1978, lead-based paint was banned for use in residences. Although the ban was passed, the reality is that millions of older homes from those decades still contain this paint, requiring safe handling measures during renovations to protect the health of future generations. Flame retardants. Something else that was normal but is now strictly limited is flame retardants. In the 70s, these chemicals were everywhere in our daily lives, from children's sleepwear and furniture to everyday clothing. Their purpose was to prevent fires, slow down combustion, and improve the safety of items. People back then believed this was a necessary protective measure. However, what few realized at the time were the potential dangers of these very chemicals. Studies gradually showed that flame retardants could be absorbed through the skin or respiratory tract and began linking them to serious health issues like hormone disruption and cancer. This led to the introduction of stricter regulations and the banning of many types of flame retardants in the 2000s. Notably, old furniture, especially from the 70s and 80s, can still contain high levels of these toxic chemicals, showing the long-lasting impact of past industrial decisions. Selling raw milk, a controversial 70s memory. Do you remember the taste of fresh, full cream milk poured directly from a glass bottle and promoted for countless health benefits? In the 1970s, buying raw milk that hadn't been pasteurized, was completely normal, even sought after for its creamy texture and rumored health benefits. Farmers and small dairies often sold their products directly to consumers with no restrictions on this practice. It was a time when natural and unprocessed was highly valued, and many believed it was the best source of nutrition. However, behind the appealing facade and health beliefs, a frightening hidden risk was growing. Concerns about foodborne illnesses began to emerge, directly linked to consuming unpasteurized milk. We're talking about serious pathogens like Salmonella, E. coli, and Listeria, which could cause severe infection outbreaks. By the 1980s, the alarm bells rang louder than ever. Health officials began publicly warning about serious health risks, particularly the danger of infection outbreaks from raw milk. A crucial turning point came in 1987 when the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, FDA, issued a regulation requiring pasteurization for all interstate milk sales. Subsequently, individual states quickly followed suit, implementing increasingly strict regulations to protect their citizens. Today, the story of raw milk remains a controversial topic. Some states still allow its sale under extremely strict conditions, while many others have completely banned it. Looking back, it's hard to believe that a beverage once considered a staple for many families has now become such a complex and contentious legal issue. This is a clear testament to how profoundly food safety awareness and regulations have changed over the decades. What do you think about raw milk still being legally sold in some places today? Is it an unnecessary risk or a freedom of choice? Candy cigarettes. Finally, if you grew up in the 1970s, you surely remember a sweet treat that was an essential part of childhood: candy cigarettes. They were widely available in every grocery store, designed with incredible detail to mimic real cigarettes. They even had crisp white paper wrappers and a red tip, just like a lit cigarette. Some even had a puff of powdered sugar, creating an illusionary cloud of smoke when kids blew into them, making the pretend play even more realistic. It was endless fun mimicking how adults held, flicked, and smoked candy cigarettes with cool flair. At the time, most parents didn't think twice about these candies. Why? Because smoking was incredibly common back then. You could see smokers everywhere, on TV with glamorous ads for the Marlboro Man or Joe Camel, in restaurants, even on airplanes. Even more surprisingly, high schools even had designated smoking areas for students, and teachers often smoked at their desks. So, it was understandable that children wanted to imitate adults. However, as awareness of the health risks of smoking grew, that's when concerns about candy cigarettes began to surface. Critics argued that these candy sticks normalized smoking behavior in children, potentially leading them to real smoking as they grew up. By the late 20th century, bans and packaging changes were put in place. Many countries restricted the sale of candy cigarettes or required them to be renamed candy sticks and have all cigarette-like designs removed. Today, it's hard to imagine a candy so closely tied to the image of cigarettes being widely sold to children. But in the 70s, it was simply a normal snack on the candy shelf. Times have changed, and so have the rules. What was once the norm, an indispensable part of daily life in the 1970s, is now part of the past or even illegal. We hope this trip down memory lane has brought you memorable memories and deep insights into a unique, colorful, but also risky decade. Do you remember any other crazy things from the 70s that are now banned? Share them in the comments below. If you enjoyed this nostalgic journey, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next exciting videos, and share this video with your friends to relive those beautiful memories together. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on our next time travel adventure.